Story 1. I want to tell you what happened to my family the night we went camping in the woods. It's the kind of story people dismiss as impossible, but I need you to believe me. Because once it starts, once you see it, you can never unsee it. And God help you if it decides to notice you back. We were a family of 4, me, my wife Laura, our 9-year-old daughter Emily, and our 6-year-old son Ryan. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, 2 nights under the stars near a river deep in the forest. The kind of thing you see in old photo albums. No phones, no city noise, just us and nature. The day we arrived felt perfect. We hiked a couple of miles down to the riverbank, pitched our tents, and built a small fire. Emily and Ryan splashed in the water while Laura and I cooked hot dogs and laughed at how clumsy we were trying to make the camp look like something out of a travel magazine. That evening, as the sky faded into orange and purple, I remember feeling thankful. Life was chaotic back home, but here, in this quiet place, everything felt safe, peaceful. I wish that feeling had lasted. It was around midnight when it began. The kids had fallen asleep in their sleeping bags, and Laura dozed beside me. I was awake, just listening to the sounds, the flowing river, the whisper of leaves moving against the night air. But then, slowly, another sound broke through. It was laughter. At first, soft and distant, like a child giggling somewhere behind the trees. I almost smiled, thinking maybe Emily had woken up and was dreaming or playing. But then I looked at her. She was right there, lying on her side, her tiny chest rising and falling in deep sleep. I froze. The laughter came again, clearer this time. And I realized, with cold terror crawling into my chest, that it wasn't just any laughter. It was Emily's laugh. Her exact laugh, full of that light, bubbly tone she always had when she found something funny. My wife stirred then, whispering, "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, the laugh repeated, right outside the tent flap. I moved slowly, telling Laura to stay still, and unzipped the tent just an inch to look outside. My breath caught in my throat. Beyond the flap, where our campfire should have been burned low, there was another fire, a full, crackling blaze. Around it sat 4 figures. At first, I thought they were strangers, maybe other campers. But the longer I stared, the more my stomach twisted. The people sitting at that fire were us, our double, our mirror, our family. 4 bodies, identical to mine, Laura's, Emily's, and Ryan's, sat there silently, not moving, not speaking. Their faces reflected the firelight, but their eyes were wrong, too wide, too still. They stared directly at our tent, unblinking, as though waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to shut the tent immediately, to pretend I hadn't seen them. But I couldn't move. My body was locked in place, my eyes glued to those things. And then, one of them, the other version of Emily, tilted her head back and laughed. That same damn laugh we'd heard. Laura clutched my arm, trembling. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The doubles just sat there, watching. My mind spiraled with questions I didn't want to know the answers to. Why were they here? How long had they been here? What would happen if we stepped outside? Finally, I forced myself to zip the tent shut. My hands shook violently, the sound of the zipper ridiculously loud in the silence. Inside, the air felt suffocating. Laura held the kids tighter, not waking them, just clutching them like she was afraid they'd slip away. We stayed that way for hours. The laughter stopped, but we could hear the fire crackling outside. Occasionally, footsteps circled the tent, slow and deliberate. Once, something brushed against the fabric, close enough to press the shape of a hand against it. I didn't sleep. None of us did. We waited, stiff with fear, until the faint glow of morning light pushed through the trees. When I finally dared to open the tent again, the fire was gone. The doubles were gone. The entire forest was silent except for the river's steady current. Our own campfire had burned to nothing but ash. We packed fast, faster than we ever had in our lives. I didn't bother folding anything or checking if my shoes were tied. We grabbed everything we could, shoved it into the bags, and practically dragged the kids along the trail. I never looked back at that riverside. Not once. But here's the part that keeps me awake at night, long after we made it back home. At the bottom of my backpack, under the mess of clothes and snacks, I found something. A wooden figurine, carved crudely, but unmistakable. It was me. Every detail of my face chipped into the wood, my eyes carved as hollow circles. And across the neck, a deep, deliberate slash. So I ask you again, if you hear laughter in the woods that sounds like someone you love, will you look outside? Or will you pretend it isn't there? Because what you see might be something that's already waiting for you. Story 2. I don't care if you think I'm exaggerating or if you're the type who laughs at ghost stories. Just listen to me. Never, ever follow a scream in the mountains. Because the sound isn't always coming from a person. Sometimes, it's coming for you. There were 5 of us that night. Me, my best friend Matt, and 3 others. Jake, Lisa, and Sarah. We'd driven up to the mountains for a weekend of camping, drinking, and forgetting the world. We pitched our tents on a flat patch of land surrounded by pines. By day, it was beautiful. By night, it was black and endless. We spent the first evening roasting marshmallows, telling dumb stories, laughing too loudly. The fire gave us courage, and the beer made everything feel safe. That's how it always starts, isn't it? Safe, normal, until the silence gets too heavy and the dark starts listening. It must have been around midnight when we heard it, the sound that ruined everything. A scream. It was sharp, tortured, human. A scream of pure agony that sliced through the night like a blade. We all froze, marshmallows halfway to our mouths, bottles dangling forgotten in our hands. "What the hell was that?" Sarah whispered. "Probably a hiker," Jake said, though his voice sounded shaky. Another scream, louder, closer. My skin prickled with fear. It was the kind of sound that made you feel like running, no matter where or from what. Matt stood up, grabbing a flashlight. "Someone's hurt out there. We can't just sit here." I wanted to tell him no, to ignore it. But how do you ignore the sound of someone begging for help? So we followed. The forest was pitch black beyond the firelight, our flashlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. Every time we thought we were getting closer to the screams, they would shift, fading just ahead, always too far. The sound pulled us deeper and deeper into the woods, like a cruel lure dangling just out of reach. We walked for hours. My watch said 3:15 a.m., though time felt warped out there. My legs ached, my throat dry, but still, the screaming came, sometimes high-pitched and panicked, sometimes a low, drawn-out wail that felt less like pain and more like warning. "Guys!" Lisa's voice cracked. "We're not finding anyone. We should go back." Nobody argued. Even Matt looked pale and beaten. So we turned around, following what we thought was the way back to camp. But the forest didn't agree. No matter how far we walked, the trail twisted in strange ways. Trees we swore we'd passed already showed up again. Branches overhead seemed to knot tighter, as if the forest itself was enclosing. At one point, I swear I saw something pale slip between the trees, too fast to be human, too tall to be natural. By the time the first gray hint of sunrise touched the sky, we were exhausted, stumbling, half crazed with fear and fatigue. But then, miraculously, we saw it, the clearing, our campsite. Relief poured over me in an almost painful wave. But our relief didn't last. The moment we stepped into the clearing, my stomach dropped. It looked like our camp, but it wasn't. Not anymore. The tents were not the way we left them. They were shredded, ripped open with deep, claw-like gashes. Our chairs were overturned, the fire pit scattered with ash and blackened stones. It looked like something huge had plowed through while we were gone. And then I saw it. The worst part. From one of the torn tents, Sarah's tent, long drag marks stretched across the dirt, trailing into the trees, as if something had gripped and yanked whatever was inside. We stood frozen, the morning light washing everything in pale gray. Nobody spoke, nobody dared. Lisa began to cry softly, and Matt swore under his breath, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. That's when the scream came again, not in the distance this time, not ahead or behind. It came from all around us, echoing through the trees, circling like laughter, in voices that sounded less human now and more broken, like something learning how to sound like us. Something moving between the trees. I don't fully remember how we got out. Panic, mostly. Running without thinking, tripping, slashing branches out of our way. Eventually, the forest spat us back onto the dirt road near where we'd parked. Our car was untouched, waiting. That was luck. I know it. We never found our original camp again. Not the shredded tents, not the drag marks, nothing. It was as if the forest folded it back into itself when we escaped. But there's something I need to admit. Sometimes, at night when everything is quiet, I still hear it. That scream. It doesn't sound far anymore. It sounds like it's waiting outside my window. And I know, one night, I might just make the same mistake I did before. I might listen. I might follow. And this time, I know I won't come back. Story 3. Do you ever wonder what happens to those people who vanish without a trace in the woods? They pack their tents, their gear, their neatly folded clothes, only for everything to be found later, as if they just stepped away for a moment and never came back. I used to think those were just sad mysteries. Now I know better. Some campsites aren't abandoned. They're waiting. My wife, Hannah, and I had driven up to the national forest for a weekend of camping. Just the two of us, tucked deep into the trees. It was supposed to be a romantic, quiet trip. No phones, no distractions, only campfires and stars. On our first day, the air felt crisp. The river sang in the distance, and the woods seemed harmless. But things began to twist the moment we went searching for firewood. We wandered a little further than planned, stepping between thick pines until Hannah stopped and pointed. "Look," she whispered. There, hidden slightly off the trail, was a campsite. At first, I thought it was occupied. A tent still stood upright. A folding chair faced a blackened fire pit. There were shoes neatly stacked near the flap, and a cooking stove with a pan still resting on it. Half-eaten food lay on a paper plate, now stiff with age, but strangely untouched by animals. I called out. Once, twice. No reply. The woods felt muffled, as though holding its breath. "Maybe someone left in a hurry?" Hannah said. But her voice was uneasy. I walked closer. Fresh clothes folded on a chair, a toothbrush, a water bottle still half full. It didn't feel old, not decayed enough for weeks. This camp looked lived in. Except there was no one there. A chill ran down my spine. I forced a laugh, tugging at Hannah's sleeve. "Come on, somebody else's mess. We'll leave it alone." And we did. Or so I thought. That evening, back at our tent near the river, I tried pushing it from my mind. We built a fire, cooked our dinner, and even managed to joke about how creepy it had felt. But when we returned to our tent after watching the stars, my heart froze. In front of our tent flap, laid out on the dirt, were the exact same items from the abandoned campsite. The folded clothes, the water bottle, the shoes, lined neatly in a row. The half-eaten plate of food, now set carefully like an offering. Hannah's face drained of color. "Daniel, how is this possible?" My brain scrambled for logic. Maybe someone was playing a trick. Maybe another camper had followed us back. But the forest was empty. We hadn't seen a soul for miles. We didn't talk much after that. Just crawled into the tent, zipped it tight, and lay side by side. Neither of us could sleep. Hours passed. At some point, I drifted into uneasy half-sleep. Then I felt Hannah squeeze my arm, hard. I turned, saw her face pale in the faint moonlight filtering through the fabric. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Look." I followed her gaze to the side of the tent. At first it looked like shadows, long, stretched shapes in the dark. But then I realized they weren't just shadows. They had weight. Figures. 4 of them sitting in a row, positioned exactly over the shoes outside. I couldn't see faces, only silhouettes hunched close, watching. Their heads tilted ever so slightly toward us. They didn't move, didn't speak. Just sat there, gazing with a stillness that felt inhuman. Hannah's breath quickened. I pressed a hand over her mouth, terrified they'd hear. But inside, every sound felt magnified. The beating of my heart, the whisper of fabric when we shifted, the ragged rhythm of our breathing. All around, silence crushed down on us like a weight. Even the river seemed to have gone mute. We stayed frozen for hours, I don't know how long. Every second stretched into agony. Eventually, exhaustion won. My eyes slipped shut for just a moment, and when I opened them again, the faint moonlight showed nothing. The shadows were gone. At sunrise, I rushed out. The shoes, the clothes, the food, they were gone too, as if they'd never been there. Only faint impressions in the dirt remained, shaped like feet. We didn't stick around. We collapsed the tent, shoved our gear into the car, and drove until the forest was far behind us. That should have been the end. But last night, as I stepped into our bedroom, something froze me mid-step. Outside the door, resting neatly in a line, were 4 pairs of shoes. Not ours, not Hannah's. Worn, dirty shoes, arranged carefully, ready for someone else to wear them. I closed my eyes and prayed it was a dream. But deep down, I know the truth. That campsite was never abandoned. It's still following us. And one day soon, whoever or whatever sat in those shoes will decide it's time to step inside. Story 4. If you've ever been lost in the woods, you know the feeling. That sharp panic that crawls up your spine when every tree looks the same, when every path seems to lead you deeper instead of out. But what happened to my family wasn't just getting lost. It was something else. Something wrong. Something that still waits for us every time we close our eyes. It was supposed to be ordinary. Me, my wife Claire, and our 2 kids, Sam and Lily. A weekend camping trip by the river, marshmallows, and hikes. We don't get much family time these days, so I wanted this to be special. The first night went smooth. Campfire stories, laughter, stars we could never see from the city. The next morning, Claire suggested we take a short walk before breakfast. Nothing major, just exploring. I agreed, though I made sure to mark our way. The forest was dense, and I didn't want to risk getting lost, so I carved little slashes into tree bark as we went. It almost became a rhythm. Step, mark, walk, laugh. The kids ran ahead, picking up sticks and making a game out of who could find the next mark first. It felt safe, normal, until it didn't. After a couple of hours, the kids were getting hungry, and Claire said it was time to head back. Easy enough, we just followed my marks on the trees. But the strangest thing happened. 10 minutes later, we circled back to the same spot we just left. The same oddly twisted oak tree with its scar slit into the bark. I thought maybe I'd made the mark wrong and kept us walking in a loop. So we tried again, paying closer attention this time. Another 20 minutes. Another mark. Another loop. The same damned oak tree. This doesn't make sense, I muttered, frustration sour in my throat. I marked the trail. The kids laughed nervously at first, thinking it was a game. But by the 3rd time circling back, even they stopped smiling. The forest began to feel different. The trees looked closer, taller, pressing in around us. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no insects, just the hollow sound of our footsteps and the faint, almost mocking sound of our own breathing. Claire pulled the kids close. We need to keep moving. Maybe the river, if we head toward the sound of... But the river was gone. No water rushing, no sound of life. Just silence so deep it rang in my ears. The sun began to dip behind the trees far, far too quickly. Hours slipped like sand through a clenched fist. Shadows stretched long, and with every passing minute, I felt a weight press harder against my chest. By the time darkness fell, fear had us all by the throat. Lily cried quietly against Claire's shirt, while Sam clutched my arm, asking if we'd ever find home again. I kept lying. Don't worry, we'll be fine. Just keep walking. But I didn't believe it. Then we saw it. A flicker of orange in the distance. Firelight, relief washed over me so strong my knees nearly buckled. A camp, I whispered. Someone else is here. We followed it, stumbling over roots and rocks in the dark, desperate for help. The closer we got, the brighter it burned. And then I froze. Because as we broke through the trees, I realized with dawning horror what we were seeing. It wasn't someone else's camp. It was ours, our fire, already built, already burning. Our same 4 camping chairs arranged around it, our bags stacked neatly nearby. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the figures, 4 of them, sitting where we should have been, each one of us, me, Claire, Sam, and Lily, reflected back in the firelight as perfect shadows, not moving, not speaking, just sitting there, heads tilted unnaturally, staring into the flames. I gasped, and the fire wavered. For a split second, I thought the figures turned their heads toward us, though their faces were little more than black voids against the light. Claire grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. The kids pressed against our sides, shaking. "What is that?" she whispered. I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry, my body trembling as a sick realization sank in. This wasn't just a forest trap. The woods hadn't twisted us around by accident. They'd led us back here, to this. The figures didn't move toward us. They didn't speak. They just sat silently, as though waiting. But in that stillness, I felt it. An invitation. Or a demand. We turned and ran. Branches tore at our clothes, roots snatched our ankles, but terror drove us faster. Where we went, I can't say. It was just running, fleeing until my lungs burned and my legs screamed. And then, suddenly, the sound of the river returned. The whisper of water, real this time. I could have wept with relief. We stumbled into our real campsite, our untouched fire pit, cold and dark. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like escape, barely. We packed in silence at dawn, none of us daring to speak about what we'd seen. But here's the worst part. Ever since that night, something has changed. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at bedtime, I see it again. The fire, burning bright. 4 figures sitting around it. 4 shadows waiting. And sometimes, God help me, the shadows aren't sitting anymore. They're standing. And they're staring straight at me. Story 5. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and felt certain that something outside was watching you? That paralyzing fear that grows heavier the longer you stay still? When it happened to us in the woods, there was no question. Something was there. And it didn't stop at the outside. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. Me, my wife Julie, and our 2 kids, Megan, who was 10, and Sophie, who had just turned 7. They'd been begging for a chance to sleep under the stars, roast marshmallows, and tell ghost stories. I wanted to give them good memories, something wholesome, something safe. I had no idea what we were walking into. The first night was peaceful. We had dinner by the fire, the kids laughed until they fell asleep, and everything felt perfect. But the second night, everything changed. It started with Sophie's small voice shaking me awake around midnight. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging my arm. "There's something crawling outside." At first, I brushed it off. Probably a raccoon or a fox nosing around the campsite. I told her to go back to sleep. She tried, but an hour later both kids woke up, whispering frantically. They swore they heard dragging movements, slow, deliberate scratches against the ground right outside the tent. I listened, and sure enough, there it was. Not rustling like an animal, not footsteps like a person, something crawling, dragging its weight slowly in circles around us. The sound was faint but constant. Julie squeezed my hand. "It's probably just in their heads," she said, but her pale face told me she didn't believe it. Around 3 a.m., Sophie suddenly sat up, pointing a trembling finger at the tent wall. Her voice cracked. "Daddy, it's looking at me." I turned in time to see the thin fabric buckle inward. The shape of something pressed against it, like a face, pushing its nose and mouth right into the material. No eyes I could see, just the disturbing impression of a head leaning close enough to breathe through. I lunged forward, unzipping the tent flap and shining my flashlight into the night. Nothing. The woods were still, empty, black. The rest of the night, none of us slept. By morning, sunlight didn't bring comfort. It only revealed something worse. All over the outside of the tent were muddy handprints, dozens of them. Small hands, large hands, too many to count. Palm prints smeared across the walls, fingers long and crooked. Some pressed near Sophie's side of the tent where she'd screamed. I followed the ground, desperate for logic. But that was the part that broke me. The handprints didn't lead anywhere. No footprints, no tracks, nothing connecting them to the dirt. Just the marks themselves circling us completely. Julie wanted to pack up and leave right then. But I told her it was fine. It had to be fine. I didn't want to scare the kids more than they already were. So I convinced them we'd stay one last night. That was my worst mistake. The third night, things escalated. The air outside was so quiet it was suffocating, the woods pressing down on us. The kids whimpered, refusing to sleep. I promised them I'd stay awake all night, flashlight in hand. For hours, it was silent. Too silent. My head grew heavy, my eyes started to close. That's when Sophie's scream jolted me upright. "Daddy, inside! The hands are inside!" I whipped the flashlight around and froze. The inside wall of the tent was covered in handprints. Dark, wet, dripping mud pressed against the fabric. Each time I turned the light, more appeared. Smears, shapes of fingers dragging down, palms flattening inward, as if invisible hands were crawling all over from within. And then, we saw it. The wall bulged again. But this time, not one face, several. Black shapes pushing against the thin membrane of fabric, mouths wide open in muffled silence, their breath fogging through the material. Their fingers stretched longer, pressing inside like claws ready to tear through. Julie clutched both girls, screaming, while I grabbed the zipper and yanked it open. We ran blindly into the forest, barefoot, carrying nothing but raw panic to drive us forward. Branches ripped our skin, the cold bit into our lungs. But I didn't dare stop until I saw the car parked down the dirt path. We piled in, hands shaking, and sped off as if the woods themselves were chasing us. When we finally reached safety, I braced myself to see nothing on the tent, to realize maybe stress had warped my mind. But the gear we left behind was recovered days later by a ranger. He asked us if the muddy handprints all over the tent were some kind of prank, some art project the kids had done. Because here's the part I can't explain. The prints weren't just on the inside of the fabric. They covered the sleeping bags, the cooler, the folding chairs. And worse, tiny handprints smeared all across the kids' pillows, pressed in tight around where their heads had been. I left the tent behind. Burned it, in fact. But sometimes at night when the house is silent, I swear I hear it. The soft, dragging crawl outside the bedroom wall. And when I wake in the morning, I sometimes think I see faint marks on the windows, like muddy fingers, reminding me they're still out there. Waiting. Story 6. They say the forest is alive, that it hums with insects, whispers with leaves, and sings with birds. That's how you know it's healthy. how you know you're safe. But I learned something terrible on our trip. When the forest goes silent, it's not emptiness. It means something else has taken over the noise, something waiting for you to listen. It was just me, my husband, and our 8-year-old son, Matthew. We thought camping would be good for us, a calm weekend away from screens, cities, everything that kept us wound so tight. We pitched our tent near a ridge, lit a fire, and laughed about how clumsy we were with the gear. Matthew was excited, running in circles, pretending to be an explorer. For a while, it felt perfect. But that second evening, as the sun lowered behind the trees, I noticed the change. Everything went quiet. No chirping birds, no crickets, not even the faint drone of flies near the food. The whole forest dropped into a heavy stillness, as though it had inhaled and refused to exhale. The silence pressed at my ears until it rang. It was unnatural, and my stomach sank with dread. We crawled into the tent after dinner. My husband was snoring before long, and Matthew lay curled beside me in his sleeping bag, breathing slow and peaceful. I was just starting to drift when a sound slid into that suffocating silence. Crying, high-pitched, choked, familiar. It was Matthew, my son. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering. At first I thought maybe he was having a nightmare, but I turned, and there he was, completely still, fast asleep, his chest rising and falling smoothly. The cries were coming from outside. "Mom?" The voice broke with sobs. "Mom, help me!" Every nerve in me screamed wrong, wrong, wrong. But what kind of mother ignores her child's voice echoing in the dark? I unzipped the tent and stepped into the cold air. "Matthew?" I whispered, scanning the shadows between trees. The campfire had burnt down to faint embers. Beyond that was only blackness. Yet the crying led me further, pulling me deeper into the woods. It always sounded just ahead, never closer. "Mom, please, help!" I ran, branches snagging my arms, my throat burning as I called back. I could hear him so clearly, his words twisting and breaking like he was hurt, lost. But the more I followed, the stranger the forest became. The trees all looked the same, tall and withered. There were no marks to guide me, no roots or rocks I recognized. Each time I thought I was closing in on the cries, they moved again, leading me in endless circles. Soon, I couldn't hear anything except my own rising breath and the phantom weeping that yanked at my chest. Then, up ahead, something shifted. A faint glow in the darkness. Flame. I stumbled forward and emerged into a clearing. Relief rushed through me, but it turned instantly to terror. It was our campsite. Our tent sat there in the middle, faint light flickering from inside. At first, I thought I'd somehow looped back to safety. But then I saw it clearly. The tent wasn't ours. Not really. It looked like our tent, yes, the same shape, the same size. But the fabric was no longer smooth and new. It was split, moldy, sagging under decades of decay. Holes gaped through where I should have seen nylon, crawling with mildew. The metal posts leaned, rusted to red-brown streaks. Beside it, bones littered the dirt. Not one or two, but dozens. Small animal skeletons, and some larger, shapes too human to mistake. Torn scraps of clothing clung to them. The air grew thick with a foul smell, sour and damp, and I gagged, covering my nose. "Mom," a voice whispered from inside the rotting tent. Not my husband's, not Matthew's. Something hollow. "Come in." The decayed flap stirred, like something inside had brushed against it. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. My voice cracked. "No, no, this isn't real." The crying started again, low and broken, but now from around me. Dozens of voices overlapping, all calling for help in Matthew's voice, behind me, to my left, over my shoulder. I turned in circles, heart bursting, until I caught movement at the tent again. Shadows. They sat beyond the shredded fabric, faint outlines hunched in a row around that sickly inner light. Figures, too many to count, all bent forward like they'd been waiting, watching. Something in my bones told me if I stayed even 1 second longer, I would join those shadows, another silent husk locked in the clearing forever. I ran. I don't know how long. I crashed through brush, scraped my arms, tore my jeans, until finally the woods thinned and light appeared. Real morning light, pale and clean. My lungs felt ready to collapse, but when the trees broke open, I saw it. Our real tent, bright and whole in the sunrise. My husband still sleeping, Matthew still curled in his bag. I collapsed right there, sobbing into the dirt. I didn't tell them what happened. I couldn't. I lied, said I got lost looking for firewood. We packed up and drove home that morning. But here's the truth. Sometimes at night, when Matthew is fast asleep in his room, I hear it again. That same crying, faint, fragile. Coming from the backyard. And every time I go to the window, I swear I see it there in the distance. The same clearing, the same rotted tent still glowing faintly, waiting for me to step inside. For more stories like this, share and subscribe Goofy Horror.